Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
As we count down to the Fed, welcome to the Wednesday edition with an announcement on interest rates and a policy statement just about 1 hour away. We'll talk about expectations today with Kathryn Edwards from Bloomberg Opinion. And we'll get a live report from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall on Capitol Hill with only 3 days to a likely partial government shutdown. An analysis from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Fed Day, a boatload of earnings, and it's all starting right now. At the bottom of the hour, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll begin our special Fed coverage. Michael McKee has just left our Washington bureau, dispatched to the Federal Reserve here in D.C., and we'll have some very pointed questions, I can assure you, when he spends some time with Fed Chair Jay Powell. We'll have the announcement live, of course, and the policy statement as we work our way towards the news briefing. All of this against the backdrop of a debate surrounding affordability here in Washington, D.C. It drew the president out of the bubble yesterday as he spent some time on the road in Iowa, specifically a speech in Des Moines as part of his affordability tour. And this morning, spending time celebrating what they call the Trump accounts. This is, of course, the investment accounts for newborns, drawing financial contributions from around the corporate sphere. We saw the likes of J.P. Morgan and others here in town today to be part of that celebration. But of course, we've also got an eye right now with regard to affordability and the fallout from Minnesota, a very large lack of trust on Capitol Hill, and one that could, in fact, lead to a government shutdown in just a couple of days. We are ever closer to the Friday night deadline. Tyler Kendall has been combing the hallways of the Capitol, talking with lawmakers today to get a sense of whether there could be any deal when it comes to DHS funding. That's the matter that has held this up following the second fatal ICE shooting in Minneapolis last weekend. Tyler, what are you hearing? And are we expecting a partial shutdown no matter what at this point?
Well, Joe, I can say that there is this sense that at least the sides are talking together and they are having negotiations, which feels in stark contrast to what happened during the last government shutdown, where it felt like the sides weren't even going to engage. The only thing is we are not, it appears, any closer to a deal as we careen towards Friday's deadline. The thing is that we heard from the Senate Majority Leader John Thune earlier today speaking to reporters in the hallway, and he said that Democrats really have to be engaging with the White House. It appears Republicans are really putting on the table here that there can be some non-legislative solutions, perhaps something done through executive action that could put some curbs on ICE, except for that Democrats don't really want to see that. They have repeatedly said that there needs to be something tangible tacked on to a bill that would include some of the things that they are asking for, including mandatory body camera mandate or warrant requirements, something a little bit more firm that could impact ICE's operations on the ground. The issue with that, though, is that if there's going to be a legislative solution, it's going to take a little bit of work and it's going to get complicated. Even if we see them strip out DHS funding, decide to push forward and approve the 5 other bills that are in this package, you're going to have to bring the House back into town. That is, one, logistically difficult at the moment because they're out of Washington until February 3rd, but it is also going to be difficult politically since we know that it's going to be hard to get any such changes, particularly related to immigration enforcement, through the lower chamber. Joe, the last option here is maybe we'll see some sort of standalone legislation emerge, but at this point there haven't really been concrete discussions around if that is going to be a viable option, but we are definitely up against the clock, so at this point we'll see if something comes from it.
Well, the discord around the Department of Homeland Security is palpable here, even on the Republican side, Tyler, when you see the likes of Tom Tillis, Lisa Murkowski calling for Kristi Noem, the secretary, to step down over what happened in Minneapolis, and the reaction, the language that we heard from the likes of Noem and Gregory Bovino. We've got articles of impeachment on the House side, but also these Republican senators who are standing up to oppose the administration on this front. Is all of this slowing down the opportunity to find a deal on funding?
Well, it definitely could, because we have to remember that is really what is at the heart of this at this point, a policy debate. In fact, President Trump had weighed in within the last hour in an interview with ABC News, criticizing Tom Tillis and Senator Lisa Murkowski over their opposition. And we actually just heard from Tom Tillis speaking to reporters here, basically pushing back against the president's criticism, saying that he's not going to be deterred in his opposition, that he wants to see Kristi Noem removed from her post. Now, you mentioned there is some movement around an impeachment resolution in the House. By last count, I believe it has about 160 Democratic signatures on it. We have to keep in mind a simple majority is needed for impeachment. So if we do the math, that would mean at least 3 House Republicans would have to get on board in order to approve any articles of impeachment. And right now, it's hard to see where they would actually find those numbers in the House. So instead, Joe, you're going to hear a lot about this focus on investigations. We've heard a lot more senators, Republican senators, more comfortable with that idea that they are going to hold full investigations. As of now, the next date that we are expecting the DHS secretary to be up here on Capitol Hill is March 3rd. That was for a previously scheduled oversight hearing in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, but no doubt this is going to be the focus.
Yeah, that's for sure. Dick Durbin even suggesting she may or may not have the job by March 3rd. Tyler, thank you. With us live from Capitol Hill on what's going to be another busy one here as they try to find a solution. Bloomberg's Washington correspondent. We're just hearing from some of our reporters down the corridor from where Tyler is standing in the rotunda. Speaking with Jeanne Sheehan, of course, the Democratic senator from New Hampshire has been key as a negotiator in bridging the gap across the aisle on any number of issues. She was just asked if she would vote to open up the government this time. She said, what we need are reforms for ICE. She went on to say, we have not yet also seen a formal proposal on Obamacare tax credits. It's not getting any easier as we assemble our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Rick is our Republican strategist, of course, partner at Stonecourt Capital, joining us, if you're with us on Bloomberg TV, from a warm and sunny Phoenix, Arizona. Jeanne, with the rest of us on the East Coast, our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, what do you make of this rhetoric from the likes of Jeanne Sheehan? If she's not convinced, I'm guessing most of the rank and file are not either on the Democratic side.
That's right. I don't think they want to take any promises, from the administration to do better. They've been down that road before. I go back to the rescissions battle in the first budget. It really set the wrong tone, right? I mean, when the administration says, no matter what you give us, we're going to rescind it, that then harkens into their minds today that says we could cut a deal with these guys tomorrow, and they just decide to go back on it a week from now. So there's a lack of trust, and without the trust, those kinds of promises are going to not be taken. So they're looking for statutory changes. Statutory meaning in law, the agencies, in this case DHS, has to do the things that they direct them to do. And it's hard to blame them. They've not been in on any of the decision making when it came to the big, beautiful bill that added huge amounts of funding to DHS. So they're skeptical. And I think that reflects where we are today with these negotiations. Certainly Jeanne Sheehan indicates that in her comments today. And so, look, I mean, what that probably means is we're headed toward a shutdown, at least for a little while, until the House can approve whatever deal the Senate strikes.
12:01 a.m. on Saturday. Jeanne, we heard from Jeanne Sheehan, as noted, add Senator Chris Murphy, the Democrat from Connecticut, who rarely holds back. He says the things we care most about are getting an independent investigation, that's one, and ending these roving patrols terrorizing Minneapolis. He says solving these problems with secret police and getting some identification of body cams. If all of these items were in a separate standalone piece of legislation, would Democrats go along, vote for the funding bill, and then vote on this separately?
I think they might. They certainly would seriously consider it. But I think from the Democrats' perspective, and from the perspective of so many Americans, the problem here is that what we've seen with the president, Donald Trump, is a change in rhetoric, but not changes in policy on the ground yet. Obviously, that may be coming, and the shifting of Tom Homan in there may help bring that about. But until people see those kinds of operational changes, those kinds of policy changes, they are going to remain very concerned and unwilling to support the budget that was previously put into place, given the fact that we've seen 2 Americans shot dead on the streets of Minneapolis. And it doesn't help, by the way, that the president just about an hour ago, and I think Tyler was referencing this, called Tom Tillis a loser because he is questioning what the administration is doing with ICE. And of course, last night in a speech that's supposed to be about affordability, went on the attack once again against Ilhan Omar, who just minutes later was attacked as she was holding a town hall with constituents. So, the president trying to soften the rhetoric potentially a little bit on what happened out in Minneapolis doesn't assuage people at all, given the lack of a change in policy and the lack of a change in rhetoric in so many other ways. And so I think for anyone in Congress on the Republican side to suggest that the Democrats should be negotiating with the White House, where are the Republicans? And I give Tillis and Murkowski and others credit, standing up and saying enough is enough. We don't shoot people dead on the streets of our cities, American citizens.
Well, they've got numbers on their sides. Rick, you probably saw this new poll from the Searchlight Institute, 1,500 people. It was conducted after the shooting of Renee Good and before the shooting of Alex Preddy. In the immediate aftermath, 58% strong public support for reining ICE in. The memo states bipartisan majorities of voters oppose ICE's lawless tactics, including detaining U.S. citizens, 73%, entering people's homes without warrants, 79%, failing to wear clearly identifying uniforms, 70%. Do numbers like these embolden Republicans on Capitol Hill?
Well, I don't know if they embolden Republicans. I mean, these are pretty stark numbers to look at. And anytime you have numbers like this that are, the political people look at things that spike people's interest over 60, 65%. These are well in excess of that in some cases. And so, change is coming. This was a set of issues around immigration, both the border and the implementation of deportations, that were wildly popular for President Trump when he ran for election only a year ago. And now they've completely turned upside down to the point where Republicans are really starting to question, especially House Republicans, what do they say when they go back to their constituencies for the midterm elections? They used to be able to talk about and even demagogue the immigration issue because it was so egregious. The open border policy of Biden gave them something that they could really talk about all the time. Now that's off the table. Talking about immigration now is going to lose you votes if you're a Republican, not get you votes. And this coalition that Donald Trump put together of especially young men and minorities, when you dig into that poll, you find that it's even worse in those categories. And so they're not going to be reliable voters for the Republican caucus come midterms.
Boy, what a reversal. And when I say embolden, I mean in terms of opposing the administration on this one. Jeanne, I was struck last evening on the late edition of Balance of Power. Megan Hayes, the Democratic strategist, was with us and stopped herself when she almost said abolish ICE. She said we cannot use that word and went out of her way to say we need to reform ICE, because for a lot of Democrats, this sounds a heck of a lot like defund the police. In this same poll, Democratic messaging, more voters preferred reforming ICE than abolishing the agency, 30% to 19%. How careful do progressives need to be with that messaging?
They should be very careful with it, but it's more than just the messaging. The reality is we do need a secure border. That is clear. Any thinking person knows that. And had Donald Trump stopped at securing the border, which he has done a very good job at, and not sent masked gunmen onto the streets of the cities, his numbers would be absolutely reversed from what they are. So it's not just a rhetoric issue, I think. It is the reality. We need sound border policy and patrols. And, I was talking to a group of young people yesterday, and one thing that struck them as so egregious, it sounded silly to them, but just to show people how the insanity of what has happened here with ICE. The idea that you would train ICE agents for 47 days because Donald Trump is the 47th president of the United States sounds like it's from an SNL skit. And yet that's what we are told the training amounted to. So we need serious immigration reform. We need serious border security. We don't need rhetoric. We do need patrols. But you have to be serious about it, and execution matters. And Donald Trump should know that, because he has consistently pulled Joe Biden to the carpet for what happened with us leaving Afghanistan. And yet that was all about execution. Execution matters here too, and they have done that very badly. They need to rethink the policies, the operations, the procedures, and not just shift the people at the top. And the buck stops with Donald Trump. He is the president. It doesn't stop with, I don't believe, Kristi Noem.
Well, we'll see if Kristi Noem is even impacted by that. We've only got a minute left here, Rick. We spoke last evening with the author of articles of impeachment against Kristi Noem in the House of Representatives. I think at last check, she had 160-something Democrats on board. Would there ever be a world in which Republicans would join that effort, or is this up to the president?
It's an interesting question, Joe, because this coalition in support of the president's agenda with deportations is fraying at the edges. Tillis isn't the only one who is speaking out about it. In fact, even the corporate community is starting to distance themselves from the Trump administration. So, look, you never want to see another thing happen like what's been happening in Minneapolis. But at the end of the day, anything else that the ICE or border agency do that puts civilians in harm's way is going to be a fire inside this administration and could result in Republicans voting for impeachment.
Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, thank you both so much for the insights. We'll turn our attention to the Fed coming up. Kathryn Edwards joins as we count down to special coverage, an announcement at 2 p.m. Eastern. This is Bloomberg. Things flattening out ahead of the Fed, and we'll have, of course, much more in our special coverage that begins just moments from now, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, as you would expect. Thanks for joining us on a truncated edition of Balance of Power here on this Fed Day. We'll have much more to discuss, including unpacking all of this on the late edition. Michael McKee will join us here live from Washington. Just a day after the president left the bubble to talk about the issue once again of affordability. This has been a tour, and we've been promised a weekly city or stop on that tour for the indefinite future as the president tries to seize on the issue of affordability on the midterm campaign trail. Iowa was the stage last evening. Des Moines, in fact, Clive, Iowa, right outside of Des Moines, where the president spoke about a lot more than affordability. In fact, took aim at the chair of the Federal Reserve. Listen.
Despite a bad Fed chairman, a guy that has we call him too late. He's too late. Jerome, too late, pal. He's too late. He wants to keep rates as high as possible. Despite that, we've driven rates down. You know, when you're really good, you can get them down despite everything, because ultimately it just sort of follows nature. Mortgage interest rates are now at the lowest level in 3 years. By the way, well, we have a great Fed chairman. I think we're going to have one. I'll announce it pretty soon. You'll see rates come down a lot.
We'll see about all of that. And we spent some time ahead of the Fed today with Kathryn Edwards, economic policy consultant and Bloomberg opinion contributor, with us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kathryn, it's great to see you. I'm guessing Donald Trump might be disappointed by the outcome of this meeting today. What do you think?
Well, he's not in control of it, so he's bound to be disappointed regardless. But no, I don't think they'll be lowering rates today.
Not lowering rates today. Did the market get ahead of itself in expecting a series of rate cuts this year?
I mean, I think it's hard to say. The economic data is not conclusive, and that's why we are in this pattern of small cuts and holding steady. An inconclusive economy that's slowly slowing down with bright spots and dark spots happening with every monthly data release is simply hard to predict. I mean, the market might be exuberant and optimistic, but in their negativity about the economy, but that's not the same as like a bait and switch or a rug pull. I mean, truly, our economic situation is difficult to parse. The Fed's not trying to get ahead of the situation in a way that is unwarranted by the data. So I understand that the market wants to make long decisions, but the Fed has to take it as it comes.
Well, absolutely. And he's going to have to explain his rationale, of course, in a room full of reporters. And I'm wondering your thoughts on what might happen after 2:30, because this is, of course, the first meeting in which Jay Powell stands before reporters since his hostage-looking video around the announcement of the criminal investigation, the DOJ investigation into the Fed chair. To what extent will he need to continue sending that message that he delivered in the video today?
I would suspect that he hopes it doesn't come up at all, and that the decision-making of the board, of which is not solely him acting today, speaks for itself and has the data speak for itself, and not having to defend his position against political attacks. I mean, this press conference is supposed to be about his take on the economy and what the Fed sees going forward, telegraphing stability and independence. I'm sure he doesn't want to talk about it. I'm sure someone will bring it up.
Yeah. I mean, then there's reality. Of course, the tenure of the Fed chair seems like fair game, and that's what, of course, this is all leading to. I'm sure that Lisa Cook is going to come up as well. What would you ask the Fed chair today, Kathryn?
I think it depends. Is it going to be Mr. Fed Chair? Or is it going to be candid? I've always wanted to know what Powell thought about certain aspects of our economy, just how much pressure the labor market can take, how long our estimates of monthly job growth are going to be able to be sustained in the face of population declines, and what the Fed plans to do about that. I mean, the political questions of today are in some ways the least interesting. He's being attacked because he's independent. I don't know what he could say that would make that a more interesting conversation. I mean, the real questions about our economy are the big ones, the ones that we don't have the answers to. He's under attack for no good reason. But what are we going to do if immigration does decline to the degree that it could, given the crackdowns? How are we going to view economic growth if all of it is coming from the healthcare sector? Is that really a sustainable future? How does the Fed think about those types of issues, these big picture questions about the economy? Because we focus on this press conference of this meeting of this day for this rate cut, but they look 20 years in the future, and we don't really ask him about that. And I would want to know about those big picture swings, the ones that really have our economy on the line.
What a really great answer. Does Christopher Waller's status as a Fed chair candidate ride on his position today?
I couldn't tell you. I don't mean to sound glib, but I don't think that Trump's appointments are that predictable or that transparent. It's really about what they say behind closed doors of how loyal they are to him, and we can only speculate what that is. I mean, Powell was a Trump appointee, and here we are, all these years later, of him being what did he call? I don't even care. Calling him some name because he disagrees with him. I mean, there's no really predicting that. What I will say is I think that there are a lot of people who are going to be forced into the position of lying to the president about their independence if we are able to preserve Fed independence. It's going to come down to someone being a very successful liar to the president in order to say, well, of course, I'll do what you want, and then I'm going to become a Fed chair and you have no control over me. That's a pretty tenuous place for a very vital aspect of our economy to be in.
Yeah, that's quite a pretzel. Kathryn Edwards, will the president have to deal with the overhang of affordability for the rest of this year?
Yes. It's something that I think the Biden administration had to learn as well, is that there are some bills in the economy that come due, and it's not your fault. You didn't start it, but it's coming due on your watch. We've had a solid 5 decades of pretty weak income growth and wage growth for the bottom third to 70% of the income distribution, depending on the year. We've had very little successful forays into making housing, healthcare, childcare, or elder care more affordable for families. And these things are going to stack up over time. They're going to accumulate and get worse. There's no 1 or 2 month fix for a 5-decade problem.
Got about a minute left. Does Jay Powell stay on the Fed board after this term ends? Has the president put him in that position, or do you think he cannot wait to leave?
I think he stays. I mean, I think his character would be that he would stay and kind of help shepherd the next Fed president through a very delicate fight to maintain independence, and I don't think he would walk away. I mean, he's going to have that great book deal whenever he leaves, whether it's in a year or 4 years. So I don't think he has to rush out to sign. I think that he can stay and finish the job. He strikes me as someone who has a lot of personality buried underneath a public visage.
Fascinating. Some unexpected answers from Kathryn Edwards. Kathryn, it's great to see you. Thanks for being back with us here on Bloomberg, and look for her work, Bloomberg Opinion, OPIN Go, on your terminal, and of course at the website, Bloomberg.com. I'll meet you back on the late edition of Balance of Power